Five Nights at Freddy's hides its lore in secret split-second moments, the deepest, darkest corners of its locations, in single lines within the multitude of books, and more. Today though, we're going to do something that no one's really done before, an attempt to take a different look at the lore through the perspective of its music. From the titles of the tracks revealing timeline secrets, motifs found within multiple tracks, revealing some hidden connections, and even help reveal the entire story of Midnight Motorist. So subscribe so we can hit 255,000 subscribers before the end of the month. I just launched channel membership, so become a member to help support the channel and get some exclusive benefits like the video, and of course remember this is all just a theory. Now let's begin. Starting off with FNAF 1, and we of course have the infamous Toreador March, used by Freddy when the power in your office goes out as well as when he's in the kitchen. Before I begin with my interpretation of this track, for these first 3 games I cannot claim that any of this is 100% intentional, since up until FNAF World, Scott was actually purchasing the licenses to these songs, and so they obviously weren't made specifically for FNAF. It's still fun to talk about though, but don't bite me if, again, just for these first 3 games, things may sound a little bit stretchy. Either way, the Toreador March originates from the French opera Carmen, being sung by the protagonist, the bullfighter, which is what Toreador means in French, and the entire song's lyrics are all about the bullfights, and specifically his victory throughout them. It's a victory march. This is what FNAF 1 is, a bullfight. So when Freddy plays his tunes once the power is out, he's telling you that he's won and that you've lost. He's actively taunting you and playing his victory march before the battle is even won. So keep that in mind next time you make it to 6 AM despite your power being out, and feel even more vindicated that now you've also damaged Freddy's ego. Besides that, there's not really any other songs to talk about in the first game, but I do want to point out that the circus pipe organ song that plays randomly throughout the night could possibly be what gave Scott the idea for the recent carousel related origins tied to Fazbear Entertainment. But moving on to FNAF 2, and we of course have to talk about My Grandfather's Clock, the song used for the Puppets music box that was originally written in 1876. Something interesting about this song though is that it was written by, and no, I'm not joking, a man named Henry Clay Work. Yes, the creator, or better word, father of this song was named Henry, sharing the name with the character in FNAF's story who happens to be the one who creates the puppet, and is the father of Charlie, who goes on to possess it. I do also find it funny that Clay Work sounds a lot like Clay Burke, who is the police chief in the novel trilogy. It's very, very possible that this is where Scott got the name for both of these characters from, although more lore-wise, and the song is actually about a kid describing their grandfather's clock. While it needed to be wound at the end of every week, it worked perfectly fine for 90 years up until their grandfather died. Suddenly, the clock stops working and it never chimes again. Now, of course I don't believe any of this was planned this far back, but with the information we know now, it coincidentally correlates to Henry and Charlie's story in FNAF 6, as once Henry, the grandfather, dies, the puppet, his clock that needed to be wound, also dies. But elsewhere in FNAF 2, we hear another song that's also used for the puppet, specifically when it's about to kill you, titled Pop Goes the Weasel, which is simply a reference to the puppets pop out of the box, and due to it being a children's nursery rhyme, is also referencing it being possessed by the spirit of a child. Another nursery rhyme, London Bridge is Falling Down, is used in the trailer for the game, another reference to them being possessed by the spirit of children, by showing Withered Bonnie activate to the end of the song. Finally, before we get into the real juicy, actually intentional stuff, we arrive at FNAF 3. The songs in this game all come from the hidden minigames. Faites-le mes aveux, within Balloon Boy's Air Adventure, the title translating to Tell Her of My Confessions, which does actually make sense when you consider that within this and the other minigames, we're putting all of these memories together, the confessions for Charlie, the her to create the happiest day. This is what I was talking about with a lot of the tracks within these first 3 games. I feel like these weren't intended to mean all of this, but they do coincidentally work really well with those meanings. Speaking of, the song behind the Fredbear's Family Diner Stage 01 minigame is titled Flight of the Swans, also known as Swan Lake Conclusion. Interestingly enough, within that story of Swan Lake, one of the 2 main protagonists are cursed, only taking human form at night. That same character is then tricked by the other in order to seal their fate, the story ending tragically with the 2 of them dying together. This mirrors FNAF's story all too well. The 2 main characters, William and Henry, own Fredbear's family diner together, William eventually showing his true form in the night, committing his evil. Later in the story, he's then tricked by Henry to the FNAF 6 location, where Henry seals his fate and the two die together. Funnily enough, the story also heavily revolves around a lake, mainly the ending, which just happens to be exactly where William is defeated for good in the Fazbear Frights epilogues. I'm just saying, the parallels are there. Moving on, and the track behind Shadow Bonnie's glitch minigame is titled Serenade, the story behind the song being about a person wishing to be loved by another, which makes a lot of sense when considering that this is the final minigame to help bring the spirits together, for them to rest in their happiest day. Speaking of, behind their happiest day is the song Waltz in A-flat major, which was originally written as a farewell piece. The connection there is quite clear. Besides that though, these first three games simply used other stock music and random ambience that have no real lore to get from them. This also includes FNAF 4, where it's simply just a sad song used, and that's basically it. FNAF World was when FNAF actually started to get original tracks made exclusively for the games, although none of these tracks nor their names had much meaning. Although then we get to FNAF 5, Sister Location, and this is where things get interesting. Before we even get into the game itself, the track behind the trailer is titled The Raid. Right now, the main theory about the Funtime animatronics is that they contain the remnant of the original animatronics, William invading Freddys and breaking the animatronics down to steal their endoskeletons. It's possible that this title is actually a reference to that, with the entire trailer teasing us on these new Funtime animatronics, with the spirits inside stating we don't know what they've been through, all being accompanied by a track telling us that something they've been through was a raid. Stretch, well, not only that, but the main menu music as well as the credits music is titled Gradual Liquidation. A liquidation is either about bringing a business to its end, and/or destroying or killing someone violently. If we use the more common form of definition, at the time the only closure of an entire business or franchise that we knew about in the story would be the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza franchise, which permanently ends after FNAF 1's location closes down. So this would likely be hinting that this game takes place after the entire Freddy's franchise has come to its end, which would again be after FNAF 1. Even the latter definition hints at it, gradually killing someone violently, correlating to the mini-games that take place after Freddy's permanent closure, with William being spring-locked and running in place for 30 long years. Both of these definitions continue to connect the game's events directly to the FNAF 1 location in some way. But could this all be a giant coincidence? Sure. Although another track, Demolition Inevitable, used for Mike's big speech at the end, doubles down on it all by actually including the same motif as Freddy's Toreador March from the first game, which makes sense when you consider that Mike would have heard it as the night guard there. So with the trailer teasing the possessors of the Funtimes being a part of a raid in some way, the main menu and credits track for the entire game hinting towards the game taking place after some business's liquidation, and the speech occurring after the game's events featuring a motif used and heard exclusively by Mike in the first game, it appears that the music itself was also hinting at Sister Location taking place after FNAF 1. But continuing on, and the title of Demolition Inevitable is interesting, especially since it's paired with the visuals of the FNAF 3 location being seemingly already set ablaze, with Springtrap appearing outside. This is clearly stating that the demolition of Fazbear Frights was inevitable. But why? Well, if you believe that Mike is the FNAF 3 guard, then it could possibly be hinting that Mike would inevitably find his father here, like the speech also implies, and try to take the place down. Although if you don't think he's the FNAF 3 guard, it could more so be hinting that anything related to Freddys or William ends up being destroyed no matter what. But besides that, the other tracks in the game are quite easy to explain. Crumbling Dreams being played by Ballora is in reference to the song's lyrics about her room's emptiness and the joy disappearing. Watch Your Six being played while fighting off against Enid, which is simply in reference to the fact that in order to get this ending you decide not to trust Baby and watch your back, although this also has a double meaning of defending yourself against him until 6 AM as well. Finally, Turtle Crusher plays during Baby's 8-bit minigame, likely being in reference to the minigame taking inspiration from Mario, the Turtle Crusher. The rest of the soundtrack, including Custom Night, is then random tracks with no real meaning that I can think of. But then Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, FNAF 6, is when we really hit full speed with the hidden lore inside of these tracks. When I started this video, I mentioned Midnight Motorist reveals, so let's just peel off the band-aid and jump right into the track behind the minigame, Smashing Windshields. There's more to the song and the other Midnight Motorist song that we'll get into later, you'll see why, but something important that I've not actually seen anyone ever point out is the fact that the song is actually based off, well no, it actually outright copies the song Hitching a Ride by Green Day. Listen to both of these side by side. But wait, why would the Midnight Motorist track take from this random song? Well, interestingly enough, Hitching a Ride is actually about alcohol, specifically an alcoholic and their trouble staying sober. I think this actually answers a few things about Midnight Motorist. The reason William is driving home so crazily and being so aggressive is not only because he's a bad father, but because of him actually being an alcoholic. Junior's and the Green Guy, simply a bar that William got smashed inside and then kicked out by the bouncer. This is also why the track is titled Smashing Windshields. Smashed being slang for being insanely drunk. He's drunk driving. From the millions of interpretations over the years, with 5 laps at Freddys confirming the driver in the minigame is William Afton, as well as Fury's rage by having the Vanny Rabbit Boss track contain the same motif of 240 bits per mile. And the track behind the minigame actually being based off a song about alcoholism, to confirm the meaning of Junior's and the Green Guy, we're now left with only 2 main interpretations. One, the runaway is the crying child, with the footprints most likely being Shadow Freddy or Shadow Bonnie, the minigames taking place later that night of Charlie's death, or 2, the runaway is Mike, with the footprints being either a vision of Fredbear due to his brother, or also Shadow Freddy, the minigame taking place later that night of either Charlie's death still, or the night of the bite / his brother's death itself. Although there is actually more to this track, which we'll get into in a moment. But speaking of important minigames, the track behind the security puppet minigame is titled Alchemist Fantasy. In various ages and cultures, alchemists sought out the elixir of life, that supposedly grants eternal life, immortality, and miraculously cures diseases. And so calling Charlie's death an alchemist's fantasy is likely hinting that her death and then possession of the puppet is actually the reason William first learns of the supernatural. This makes sense with how it's often theorized that Charlie's possession of the puppet is actually the reason that it gained its tears, which appear to be missing from the minigame, William likely noticing this. Some, including me, think this may also hint that Charlie may actually be the first death in the story, with William knowing that he can put the crying child back together because of his knowledge of the supernatural, creating the experiments, the fun times, and basically allowing everything in the story to unfold. But that's just my interpretation and not a solidified fact. Although another interesting fact about this track was found by Lady Luck Lou, who suggests that the track apparently contains the same motif as 240 bits per mile, which is from Midnight Motorist. To be transparent though, some have argued that it's not actually the same, and this comment here goes a bit more in depth into why, but just for the sake of theorizing, let's say that it was intentional and it is the same motif. This would imply that either William was also drunk the night of Charlie's murder, his insane jealousy of Henry being amplified due to his alcohol intoxication, or possibly meaning that this minigame might take place directly after Charlie's death. Surprisingly though, there's more Midnight Motorist music lore. Within FNAF 6 we play as Mike and are able to purchase a bunch of random attractions and play through a bunch of minigames, which brings some new tracks with some interesting titles. One of these tracks is titled A Slice and a Scoop, and the reason it connects to Mike isn't just because he's the one playing the minigames, but the title A Slice and a Scoop being a direct reference to Sister Location, where Mike of course gets inevitably scooped. There's also another minigame track titled No Time for Popcorn, being another reference to Sister Location where Mike goes home and eats his popcorn at the end of each night, with another minigame track titled Minor Corrosion of the Bizet, featuring the Toreador March motif, also referenced in the name of the song, which just happens to also connect to Mike. These all further hint that we are definitely playing as Mike in FNAF 6. But then, interestingly enough, another minigame track is titled The Runaway. This is why I talked about the other 3 tracks first, that purposefully connect the minigame tracks to Mike, more than just, well, he's the one playing them so it must be about him. So is this hinting that the runaway character in Midnight Motorist might just be Mike like some have theorized? Well, it could be for sure, although it's equally important to call out that there's another minigame track titled Groovy Gravy that has no real connection to Mike whatsoever, and kind of just ruins the whole thing. It depends whether you think 3 of 4 is enough of a connection, but maybe half the tracks might be about Mike while the other half are just random. Either way, any of this music stuff should be used as supporting evidence, and I really do not think this is strong enough to be a slam dunk or anything. We'll put all the information that we've learned throughout this video together at the end, so let's move on for now. Although before we head back to the music, I want to quickly head over to the sound effects, as something a lot of people seem to have missed is that within the salvage sections of the game, each animatronic actually has its own unique sound effect. Scrap Baby has random clicks as heard here. Molten Freddy also has other random clicks as heard here. Lefty has whirring sound effects as heard here. And interestingly, William has a heartbeat as heard here. This is telling us that William is actually still alive after the spring locking, and not just possessing the suit or his body or something, which makes sense with how the Fazbear Frights books tell us that his heart is still beating while going through Ultimate Custom Night. Back to the music, we then have 4 bits to the left, behind the 3D Maze minigame, which I believe to actually be telling us before Ultimate Custom Night that Susie, who the minigame is about, dies first in the missing children's incident, as starting at the final kill and then going 4 down would of course lead you to the first. Then Forgotten Sunday Show is the track played during all of the training videos both at the beginning and in the endings of the game. This could be in reference to the only show we really knew of within the FNAF universe at the time, Fredbear and Friends, further linking the FNAF 6 building to Fredbear's Family Diner, and possibly providing more evidence that it's actually the same building. Finally, we of course have to talk about the ending track of the game, Nowhere to Run, played during Henry's final speech. Interestingly, this track is an altered version of FNAF World's Underneath 1 track that plays once you enter the subtunnels, which eventually leads to Augment Consequences. And coincidentally, the same motif also appears in Ultimate Custom Night's Isophotropia track, the game featuring FNAF World characters. Not only this, but it also reappears in Help Wanted 2's Princess Quest 4 minigame track, specifically the 3D mode, which also features the 5 missing children and Charlie's graves. I personally think this is further hinting at how Happiest Day, FNAF World's canon elements, and Ultimate Custom Night all take place together after the events of FNAF 6, which is the current common consensus anyways. That's not all about Nowhere to Run though, as it also shares a motif with the Alchemist Fantasy track. Like I've theorized in this video and previously, I personally think that Charlie dies first in the timeline, and so to me it makes a lot of sense that the same motif is playing at both the beginning and at the end of her and William's story. Speaking of Ultimate Custom Night's Isotrophobia, which is actually the main menu music of the game, and that is actually a word for the fear of mirrors, which makes a lot of sense with the context of the game being William's misdeeds and horrors shown right back to him, even himself. Some of the gameplay tracks of the game are titled Hibernating Evil, Last Breath, Sleep No More, and Where Dreams Die, which are all further hinting at what the Fazbear Frights story The Man in Room 1280 reveals, that Ultimate Custom Night is simply a nightmare that the vengeful spirit inflicts on William while he's burning in FNAF 6. The other gameplay track, Sancta for the Fallen, means very simply a musical piece played for the Fallen, which is not only William but all the others showcased in the game, including the vengeful spirit. Although backtracking a little, and you may have noticed that I specifically mentioned how this game takes place while William is still burning. This wasn't a mistake, but actually because of the final cutscene of the game, featuring a track called Void, which actually has the faint sound of flames in the background if you listen closely. Which a lot of people seem to miss, hinting that the realm of Ultimate Custom Night, at least while Golden Freddy is still there, takes place while the fire is still going. Fellow FNAF YouTuber Ooftroop mentioned on the Rightos podcast that Void also features the Alchemist Fantasy motif.
Slowed down there because I am almost certain that Void from Ultimate Custom Night is Alchemist Fantasy.
If not, that's really fucking close.
The second half is a little harder, but I think Void is able to get away with it because it's so like somber and like deteriorated almost.
Almost like with a more of a sense of finality.
Yeah.
Which, if you believe that Charlie dies first, then it would be an extra connection by having the original story end off with the exact same motif that starts it all, the domino that eventually led William to all of this. Although if you don't believe that she dies first, then it could just be hinting that she's possibly overseeing all of this, and or further evidence that Happiest Day takes place around the same time, with a cutscene representing Cassidy going going to rest. Also, before we move on, I will quickly mention that the tracks Last Breath and Where Dreams Die both feature motifs from Sister Location's Watch Your 6 track. Now we arrive at Help Wanted, which features many of the tracks already mentioned throughout the video, so there's not too much to go through, although there is one original track that I wanted to point out, that's titled Dead Eyes, and is used in Glitchtrap's merge ending. I personally think that Help Wanted had enough within it to imply that Glitchtrap wasn't William Afton, and was just an AI mimicking him all along. So I think that Dead Eyes is another hint towards it, by telling us that this isn't a real spirit or anything similar. There is no life behind those eyes. But that's about it for Help Wanted, since it uses a lot of old tracks, and there's not even any real lore in the music of Security Breach either. Although, in the Ruin DLC, there is something interesting that I do think calls some attention. Within the ambience of the Burn Trap boss battle, we can hear this sound. This sound is not heard in any of the other tracks in any of the games, as well as not appearing elsewhere within the gameplay itself. Although interestingly enough, in the Ruin DLC, when we're first introduced to the Mimic and he reaches out for Cassie, we can hear that same sound effect within the track. Listen closely. The common consensus of Burn Trap at this point in time, mainly due to Scott's interview with Dorko, is that he was indeed meant to be the Mimic all along, who either loses those other parts or simply never gain them at all, due to the ending no longer being canon. I personally think that this sound effect that's heard exclusively in the Burn Trap boss battle and the Mimic's introduction is possibly further connecting the two together. But either way, finally we reach Help Wanted 2, which does actually feature a couple interesting tracks. The first track, Tales from the One-Eyed Cat Tavern, I believe plays in the Fazbear's levels, and is seemingly a reference to the Tales from the Pizzaplex series, a tavern being an inn or pub, although it's also possible that this being the name for the track of a Full Fest related level is a further hint that something occurred with a Mimic at one of these Full Fests and or the carnival, that is supposedly going to be expanded upon in Secret of the Mimic. Within the Carousel level, another Full Fest related level is the track Doomsday Ride, which actually includes motifs from both Watch Your 6 from Enid's boss battle and Crumbling Dreams from Bellora's song. I personally think that this is further solidifying that while Sister Location takes place after FNAF 1, the fun times themselves existed way earlier than we all first assumed, by connecting those motifs to the Full Fest. While that does seem to be the common consensus now, this could be further hinting at it as a fact. But finally, the track behind the FNAF 2 Fazbear's level, Fantogiusia, shares the same motif as Sleep No More from Ultimate Custom Night. Which is interesting since that's actually a word for tasting something or hallucinating a taste that isn't really there. A further hint that Ultimate Custom Night simply takes place within William's mind, as well as being a reference to how a lot of what we see in this game isn't actually there, and it's just within the Vanny Mask. Although it could also be furthering that William actually hasn't returned, and Glitchtrap isn't really him. Before we discuss everything that we've learned, we should also discuss the movie real quick. Within the Mike Dream sequence tracks, they all feature a sound at the beginning that's actually reminiscent of the same sound we hear within FNAF 4's Nightmare ambience, as heard here. This makes a lot of sense considering the nightmares in the movie are basically the same thing, being focused on the memory of the crying child with the originals being there in some way. Next, one of the last tracks in the movie is titled The Rabbit Lives, being played when William is sealed in by the Golden Freddy spirit, and clearly hinting that he'll return in a future movie, as well as further confirming that William is indeed still alive when he's Springtrap/Scraptrap, which like I mentioned earlier is hinted at in FNAF 6 by having us actually able to hear his heartbeat. Finally, My Grandfather's Clock is played at the very end, which obviously hints towards the puppet's appearance and importance in the second movie. So putting everything together, what have we learnt today from just the music within FNAF? Sister Location takes place after FNAF 1 and before FNAF 3. William raiding the abandoned Freddys and stealing the remnant of the originals during the Follow Me minigames. Fazbear's Fright was always going to end up being destroyed, whether that's because Mike would inevitably end up there and burn it all down, or because anything related to Freddys always ends up crumbling down horribly anyways. William is an alcoholic, likely being the reason he decided to kill Charlie from pure pure, insane jealousy alone. Within Midnight Motorist, William is drunk driving, with Junior's being a bar that he got kicked out of by the green guy who was simply just a bouncer. Charlie's death is what caused William to learn of the supernatural. William is still alive within Springtrap. The FNAF 6 building is likely the same building as Fredbear's family diner. Ultimate Custom Night is simply a nightmare, taking place while William is still burning. Happiest Day, FNAF World's canon elements, and Ultimate Custom Night all take place together after Henry's speech. Glitch Trap was hinted to just be AI from the start. The Mimic and Burn Trap are hinted at being the same in some way. We're likely going to learn about the Full Fest / Carnival within Secret of the Mimic. Mike's nightmares are focused on the memory of the crying child, with the originals there in some way, and the puppet will appear in the second FNAF movie. This was quite an interesting way to look at the franchise, and I do think that it told us a lot, even if a lot of it is speculative. Shout out to my channel members before its video announcement today: The Grey I Am Reese, It's Mr. Catmeow, and Z Exaria. You should join them down below, and I hope you all enjoyed. Have a great day / night, bye.